Okay, wow. I am, for the first time in probably years, very nervous about something. And it's this episode because I want it to go so freaking well because my guest today is, the fact that she should even take the time and sit down with me is such an honor. And I really, really mean that. I am here with Sarah Edmondson, host of A Little Bit Culty. She is a light for so many people. And I'm just so excited to have you here today, Sarah. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me. This is so fun to be here and also to meet a fellow Shapiro.
Woohoo! I know. And I think I said I'm going to have to make Shapiro my middle name and just become Michelle Shapiro to be cool like you. Well, it's your middle.
Let me tell you how cool I am. My actual full name is Sarah Juliet Shapiro Edmondson Ames. And I haven't taken it on fully.
You really got it.
It's a long name, but even just to top it all off, I think this is a fun fact. So my dad is British. He's not Jewish. And his dad was a lord. So when his dad passed, it made him a lord, which makes me honorable. Like if I go to England, I can say I'm honorable. But when I was in NXIVM, which I know we're going to talk about, my official title when I left was senior proctor. So my official full name at that time was the Honorable Senior Proctor.
Let's do it.
Sarah Juliet Shapiro Edmondson Ames.
That's amazing. And I think I'm going to have to go back and reintroduce you as that. That's incredible.
It won't fit on the title card.
That's amazing. Exactly. We would need an entire other episode to just go through the name, I think. Exactly. Totally. So we are certainly going to be talking about that. For context for my listeners, if you're a personal friend of mine, you very much already know my obsession with Sarah and the amazing, brave people who left the NXIVM cult and led other people to leave as well. If you are new to Sarah, do you mind introducing yourself to us?
Sure. My name is Sarah. I live in Atlanta. I'm originally Canadian, and I'm still Canadian, actually, technically. Born and raised in Vancouver. Forever and ever. Born and raised in Vancouver. I've got 2 little boys. In the mid-2000s, I joined a personal and professional development group that was a beautiful community of like-minded humanitarians trying to evolve themselves, achieve their goals, and ultimately change the world. But our idealism blinded us, and we didn't know what was really going on, which was that it was a cover for a group that used coercive control for the leader to procure power, sex, and money. And when my husband and I and others found out about this, we decided to blow the whistle, bring this to the authorities, eventually the FBI. And there was a trial, and the leader is now in jail for 120 years. And we have a podcast called A Little Bit Culty. That's the short version.
Yeah, that's the short version of a very real and very long story of your life. Yes, but thank you for that beautifully stated and concise version, again, just to catch people up. It's interesting. Obviously, this is generally a nutrition podcast. I do a lot of philosophical conversations too around bodily autonomy and about making sure that you're making food decisions based on your own personal voice as opposed to other people's. So this episode, I want us to talk about the cultishness of diet culture. But what I want to be really careful to do is not minimize the experiences of people who left coercive control situations. So if I'm saying something is cultish, I'm talking about more manipulative messaging and really that idea that people can donate or outsource their power to make food decisions, which I'm seeing quite a bit. But I don't want to disrespect anyone who's experienced a different level, of course, of control.
That's a great caveat. And I'd also say, one of me and my husband's sort of tools to deal with all this is we laugh a lot. There's a lot of humor, and that's where we're at in our process. We've been out for almost 6 years. This June will be 6 years, and that can be offensive to some people if they're not ready to laugh yet. There's grieving, there's anger, there's sadness. Laughter is not always a tool for everybody. So I apologize in advance if I'm not trying to make light. It's just where I'm at with it.
Sarah, I'm a Jew from Queens. My uncle is a stand-up comedian with a 30-year career. It's the depth and depravity of the jokes that we make to get through our trauma. It's extreme. So you are safe here.
Great.
And for listeners as well, we're going to keep it light and funny, and while at the same time having very serious conversations, hopefully. Too. Yes, exactly. So I first started kind of course, learning about NXIVM as being a New Yorker, there was always like different people that actually had like even taken seminars that I knew. There were people who were always tangentially. Yeah. And I have family members in Albany too.
No way.
So there was always people who were like tangentially kind of associated. And especially when The Vow came out, we all obviously were watching and talking together and saying like, oh my God, I either met this person, had this experience. So I think in New York State, it also hit really home for us. And this idea, I think here, and especially in New York City, that ego can present itself as, positive, and money and all these things have such power and influence over people, especially here. I think it really, really resonated with people, even if they hadn't had a cult experience or something like that. So I think your story is one that it really hit home. I know certainly for me and certainly for a lot of the people close to me in my life.
It's interesting also for me because so much of my journey with NXIVM, and it's 17 years total, 12 years in, 5-6 years out, has New York as the backdrop, flying into JFK or LaGuardia, taking the train up, the Amtrak train, which I love that journey, up the Hudson. Like it's such a mixed feeling.
It's very pretty.
It's very pretty. But then of course I would use the journey to like visit Manhattan when I could, and go to Pure Food and Wine, which was my favorite raw restaurant.
Oh,
which is a whole other culty. So
exactly. I was gonna say that's a whole other episode right there. Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yes. But it's really New York specifically, and this goes for anywhere in the world. Anyone is vulnerable to these things. What I always found so completely fascinating about NXIVM that I felt like related so much to the New York experience in the diet world and elsewhere was that everyone in NXIVM, in my head, all of you guys were like so brilliant independently and so the exact and educated and so the exact people who I was like, they would never fall for something, quote unquote. These would be like, to me, the least, quote unquote, again, gullible people in the entire world. And it just really shows you that every single person in their effort to do well and do good for themselves or others is vulnerable. And I think that's what really resonated with me. Cause I'm like, these are the people who would be like, get out of here if something looked bad, So, and I'm saying that to compliment you completely. And just to say that was what always struck me as I'm like, I never understood how people could end up in these situations. I always understood, but I think other people couldn't understand how very educated, very smart, very cool people could end up in situations like that.
I appreciate that. And I definitely thank The Vow for giving people that very personal look into what that really felt like and sounded like, and all the things like when they showed at the beginning, and so many people that were in my life before who didn't sign up for various reasons were like, oh, if you'd said it was like that, I probably would have signed up. So now like, oh, what was I missing? But I think that's really key. And I appreciate you saying that, because that's a big part of our message now, because people who think they aren't susceptible are probably the most susceptible.
100%. And I think New Yorkers who are like egoic are probably the people who think they are, again, the least susceptible. But I've seen, at least, in the ways of the nutrition world, in the ways of the diet world, I've seen incredible susceptibility to people, and even people approaching me saying, just tell me what to do. And it's almost like, I don't want to take that power. Like, give it back to you. You're going to have to make these food decisions yourself. So it just goes to show that we all have to be a little bit on guard in regards to especially our health, our mental and physical health, because there's no one who's above that susceptibility. Right. No one.
Very true.
I think was like, again, huge take home for me. So again, we're having this conversation about the diet world. Yep. I think that right now what I'm seeing is a divide in the nutrition and diet world and for people in ways of their health, which is that there's either a pathway people can go down, which is they can kind of engage in diet culture and do these restrictive diets, or they have to be fully body positive and not make food decisions or health decisions because they could be potentially psychologically damaging. So what ends up happening is if you're doing something that can appear as diet culture, it's kind of bad. And I'll use the example that my clients will come to me and say, I know I shouldn't want to lose weight. And I'm like, says who? Who says that you shouldn't want to lose weight? So when people feel they're doing something like eating something and saying, oh, it's okay, I give myself permission to eat this, they feel like they're doing something that's perceived as positive or societally good. And I think that can really influence people's decisions because they're like, oh, this is the right thing. Can we talk about in relationship to your experience how that might relate?
In terms of joining NXIVM or just like in general? Or I mean, I have my own separate journey with like weight and dieting, not dieting, but just like being fit. I've never seen myself as a dieter, but I've always been very borderline obsessed with being thin, never anorexic, never bulimic, but definitely like super aware of what I put in my body, and annoyingly healthy, some might say, some of my friends. I'm one of those people that's like obsessed with various things when I find it, whether it be, celery juice or turmeric lattes, or right now I've been doing Bulletproof for like 2 years, and it's annoying for people, but for me, I think my journey with that is that I try to never, say that this is the way, because I said that NXIVM was the way for so long. And I think that's now such a huge red flag for me when I see anyone touting anything as, this is the method, this is the way. That's when it gets dangerous for me. But it is something that I've struggled with, like, especially after having 2 kids. And there was this like, almost a shaming around, it wasn't okay to say like, I wanted to get my body back, or like, versus, I totally accept that my body will never be the same. I birthed a child, and then a second child, it would be totally worth it if I stayed like this, and I'm okay with it. But at the same time, like, I want to wear my old clothes, like there was sort of some strange societal pressures around that. Like, it wasn't okay to say, I want to be thin again. I don't feel like I'm answering your question. Let me go back for a second.
You are.
Okay. But I think that the main thing, like trying to relate these two concepts, I think the thing that I see the most as like a problem across the board is that there's just a ton of divisiveness. People are divided. Divisiveness is like so problematic for me right now. And that's what I find as culty, that people just label people assuming they know things. Like I saw some random chat on Instagram. I don't normally do this, but I was looking at somebody saying like, oh yeah, they weren't into our podcast anymore because they saw that one of our sponsors was affiliated with this other person that they didn't like, who they found to be really too right wing and whatever. And I'm like, I don't even know that other person. We both have the same sponsor. Like, how are you making that link? And it happened to be a 100%. Nutrition thing. It was for a probiotic. So I try to use sponsors of people that I actually use. You know what I mean? Like, not just some random.
Of course. Yeah.
Some random thing. But yeah, am I answering your question? Or am I going off topic?
100,000,000%. Yeah. No, it really is the divisiveness. And what I'm seeing again is, I of course hate diet culture and all associated parties the most. I've seen it more damaging to clients than anything. What I think a lot of what we see is then there's like this kind of kickback reaction, which is then like everything is bad in diet culture. Right. And I think people start to like get I call it like new, like little voices or identities that come along, and then you have this Sarah voice that's like, you shouldn't want to be thin. And it's like, but I also was before at the weight I wanted to be, and it felt great. So you have kind of like a new voice, which is that you shouldn't ever want to lose weight, or shouldn't want to be fit, or want to be those things because it's body shaming or something like that. So it's a lot of added shoulds with the divisiveness too, for sure.
In NXIVM, ironically, actually, we used to say, you're shitting all over yourself.
So, now I never want to use the word should again. Is that okay?
I'm sure they stole it from some other modality. I think what's really key in what I'm hearing you say is that there's these like trends, even in diet culture. You're the expert on this. I'm not, but I call myself a casual nutritionist. People are always like, what are you taking now? And
you can also be a nutritionist because there's no licensure for the word nutritionist. Yeah. So you're literally a nutritionist.
Okay,
you're good.
I'm a nutritionist now. But I definitely was totally guilty of telling people what they should do. I actually have an idea for another podcast called Unsolicited Advice with Sarah, where I just tell people how to like how to live their life.
I love that.
It would probably be just like drink celery juice and do bulletproof, but I don't want to do that because I also know that everybody's different, and I just share like this is what I do, and I take probiotics, and I like turmeric lattes, and I like celery juice with ginger and lemon, and that makes me feel good. But but again, goes nothing back to the way I do find a lot of the extreme diets culty for sure, especially things like keto. And that's mostly like, it's not even so much the method itself, it's the people around it being like, I'm so much better than you because I do this.
Exactly. Right? And I think people like to identify with something, and it's really comforting for people to feel like they're a part of something. And I've seen it be really disastrous for people when they kind of join a diet community and then that doesn't work for them because it's a physical regimen that just physically doesn't work with their bodies. And then what ends up happening is they're sick and now they lost their community and identity too. I'm sure you could talk at length about that experience and what that's like. And I'm sure this is a very micro view of your bigger experience, but can we talk about the sense of community that we seek out when it comes to things with our health, our mental health, our spiritual health?
Yeah, I think it's very normal to want that. It's definitely been something that Nippy and I have discovered in our cult recovery journey in terms of, we were very set on wanting to know how this happened. And even with the two of us, why he joined and why I joined is different. It is case by case, but generally a lot of people are looking for community and they're lonely. It's again, the dividedness is a problem. People want to have answers for things like in the same way I'm sure that they in the community that you've built, they want to know how to live. They want to know how to be healthy. And someone's coming and saying, hey, yeah, I have the way. I have a path, I have a tool set, I have a roadmap, whatever you want to call it. So that in conjunction with like-minded, like we want to be around like-minded people. We just met today. We have the same middle last name, Shapiro, and we feel connected. We're like, oh my goodness, we probably are related. That feels so good. Which, sidebar, I had that when I met Nancy Salzman, also Jewish. And, for sure it was like our families are from the same shtetl, and that feels good. It feels good. It feels safe. Part of, and not all warmth and love is love bombing. So just to preface that, but when you meet somebody and they want to bring you in and envelop you into a community, to feel like you found family is an incredible gift. If you're looking for family or you don't have family or you're estranged from your family or you want to have a better family than what you currently have. So I think that, I see a lot of, not necessarily full on cults with diets and diet culture, but very culty. And that's definitely something that Nippy and I are very careful of. We're not pointing our fingers going, Absolutely. You're a cult and that's a cult. It's like, I see a dynamic here that's cultish or culty. In other words, there's an abuse of power. And what's the abuse of power? Probably more specific. I haven't done a deep dive, particularly on the whole diet culture yet, but certainly people have written to me and more about like MLMs within diet culture. I forget the name of the company. You might not even want to mention it, but like even things like Isogenics and these companies that sell shape. Beachbody. That was the one I was going to mention. A lot of. I'm
good to mention Beachbody anytime.
Yeah,
don't worry.
A number of people have asked me if we would do an episode on Beachbody, and I just said I don't know. I don't know enough about it, but from the little research that I did, I was like, wow, definitely problematic because a lot of the jargon around what you again should be doing in the company is culty because it's based on the self-help. So this is where like the Venn diagram of self-help overlaps with diet culture, overlaps with MLMs. Those three things in a Venn diagram is like, really problematic for me.
And at the core, the most upsetting part to me is that we know that loneliness is as dangerous for a person health-wise as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. There's like this incredible study that showed that. Yeah, which is devastating too. So I get like tingly thinking about someone who's sick and looking for help and then looking for a sense of community. It like makes me like ill. It's not really tingly isn't the word. It makes me like have reflux. Like it makes me like sick to think about that truly. And the idea also that these diet companies, which have huge marketing budgets, these even some healthcare practitioners, if they're leading with ego, truly can put their own financial needs in front of the needs of the consumer. And that happens a lot more, I think, than people realize, because especially in America, you know, everything's a business. Like our healthcare is a business, dieting is a business, and all of this is really hard for people to conceptualize when people are also healthcare professionals. So I see cultishness with people following like an idol of a healthcare professional because they can have access to, you know, they have amazing degrees, much like you said, like Nancy Salzman or something. It doesn't necessarily mean that people are doing it out of their, you know, most scientific selves. There is a lot of ego in healthcare too. I think that really needs to be addressed.
Absolutely. And I think that probably there's less people like Keith Raniere out there who are, you know, sociopathic or psychopathic, narcissistic, sex addicted douchebags, in my opinion. And more so people who are maybe at one point starting out wanting to do good, and then that power imbalance or that power goes to their head or feeds their ego in an unhealthy way, and they maybe derail a little bit, is probably what happens more, especially in that space. So there's the mixture of like, yeah, I want to help people, and then like, oh wow, I feel so famous or, you know, important now, and then the values shift is probably what happens.
I think I there definitely are not as many now I know the new word of the world is that everyone's a narcissist. I want to write a book, Not Everyone's a Narcissist and Not Everything's Diet Culture. That'll be my book, because I've encountered true NPD narcissists, and there are very few of them compared to other people, like you're saying.
It's a spectrum.
I think that that's also not an easy or successful way of looking at things too, to think every healthcare professional is out there for money. That's absolutely not true either. Not everything is a scam. Most healthcare professionals are out there for the right reasons, but there are some people who, again, it's more about you praising them than getting the help that you need. So how could people spot a little bit too much ego, a little bit not enough science? Like, what do you have any tips for people on that? How do you know something's the real deal? What have you learned?
Well, I think one of the very first things is, are you being pressured from the beginning to participate in whatever it is? If it's a sales, you know, sign up now. We had this in NXIVM. If you sign up in the first 48 hours, you get a 20% discount. And anyone who's in sales knows that when people first hear about something is when they're excited. And if you miss that window, then they're likely not to buy. So there's that. Unfortunately, there is truth in that. But the problem is that people use that scarcity mentality and knowing that people have legit FOMO, and they don't want people to, you know, pass that window of wanting to purchase. But I now stand by, if you're feeling pressured in any way, that's a big red flag for me, especially if it's like, you know, we're going to do this you know, body workshop or nutritional discount or whatever the thing is. This is probably it's your field. But pressure. I would say also, like, you can Google pretty easily these days. And if there's accusations against the person, any sort of legal scandal or whistleblowers that have come out, that's, you know, where there's smoke, there's fire. And yes, of course, there can be false allegations. But that's something we tell people often, is if you are part of something or thinking about being part of something, and there's some sort of allegations against the leader or the group or the company or the organization, whatever, and you ask them, okay, so what about like this person who says that, you know, you're, I don't know, a narcissist, or, you know, that you abuse them in some way, financially, sexually, physically, verbally, whatever. If they say, you know, well, that person just went crazy, or that person can't be trusted for whatever reason, or like they brush it off, that tells me a lot about how sort of like the ethics of the company. You know, a more responsible person would say, you know, this is something that we're dealing with. We're not sure. I mean, what would I need to hear? Like, we're working with this person to see what damage was done and figuring out how we can fix it, and, you know, how this came to be, and we're really upset about it. Like, something like that would be a more appropriate response. But either way, one thing I have noticed is that when people have concerns about a company, if they go to the leadership itself, they may be gaslit. And if you don't know about what gaslighting is, in other words, it gets turned around on the person versus the allegations are dealt with. One of the main things that happened a lot in NXIVM is that if you did come up with allegations, you were accused of being a complainer. That's a complaint. And in that world, that's, especially with women, that's one of women's worst traits, apparently, is complaining. So, yeah.
Disagree.
I agree that
nagging's the best thing, and women don't complain. It's what they're saying is so valuable. It needs to be heard. But
yeah. So that was something that's a really strong red flag for me, is if you can't share a concern without it being flipped back on you. What else? Just scanning my. These in terms of like red flags for knowing that the person's egoic. I think that those are extremely helpful to start off with. Honestly, that was like, let people digest that anyway. And I'm gonna dig into I'm gonna scoop out that brain, all that we need anyway. Don't worry. That's a lot. One more thing, actually. Please. If there's, again, and I said this at the beginning, if that person, and you're not sure if it's the real deal, says it's like the cure-all, end-all, be-all, like it's just this thing, whether it's mango juice or protein powder or, like I said, celery juice, and that's it, like that, this is the thing to cure everything, that's a red flag for me.
100%. And I think when it comes to nutrition, I can tell you there's like the two psychologists made the thing, the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is basically like the more that you know, the less you think you know. And also the audio is like, the more I see, the less I know, like the more I have to like, I think that so much in healthcare, the best practitioners I know are all at the point where we're like 10 years in, 20 years in, do we know anything at all? Like you actually, after meeting so many people, I've worked with over 1,000 clients, every single person is so different. I would never claim that anything works for everyone, because it truly doesn't. I would also say something that you said before that was really important too, is that in regards to the placing urgency on clients and how important that is, I've been in health business masterminds, and that what I want people to hear from this conversation is that dietitians, doctors, all of these people who are, again, have the most amazing intentions, if they're in these masterminds, are being taught to hit people's pain points, to make sure that you're speaking directly to what's ailing them, and to increase urgency on sales. Again, I'm a New Yorker. Like if someone tries to hard sell me on something, I'm like, I'll never speak to you again. Like you're dead to me. Like it'll never work. But for a lot of people, like you said, on their sense of FOMO, or in these cases, people are freaking sick and they want answers and they're willing to pay or do anything to feel better. And I have to tell people, practitioners are aware of that too, unfortunately. And if it is more of a business than that, warm, safe space with a practitioner, I think it's also like just a gut feeling. Yes. Just know, like, if this feels a little bit weird, I just have to
tell you, I know it's a little bit off diet culture, but my son, my 8-year-old, had a filling go out. And when we were back in Vancouver over Christmas, because I didn't have a dentist here yet in Atlanta, I saw our pediatric dentist, and she was like, you need this, he needs this. It was going to cost $5,000 for all the things he needed, including having the tooth pulled, which was a baby tooth, and put a spacer in, whatever, it's $5,000. And I'm like, you know what? It was the 2 days before Christmas. I didn't want him to have to go through this. And also I just like $5,000. My gut instinct was that it wasn't just a money grab, just the urgency of the way that they, like what you just said, like the pain point, and like, and also the clinic will be closed over the holidays. And I just felt like I didn't feel good about it. I said, I'm going to wait. And they were like, that's really dangerous. You can have an infection, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, I waited. I brought him to Atlanta. It's cost $700. They say you don't need to pull the tooth because it's wiggly and it's going to come out like in a month at least. And I was so glad I waited. But listen, I was trained in sales in NXIVM, and this is sales stuff that I've since learned is not NXIVM sales. It's just sales, which is manipulative. And I was just trained that manipulation wasn't bad because I'm leading them somewhere good. So I think that, what I mean? I think that a lot of people do think that. They're like, yes, I'm hitting their pain points, but I'm going to help them right? So that they don't feel like they're doing anything bad. And the thing that we were taught always was like, if I met you, for example, Michelle, and, at some cool cafe in New York and, and we're hitting it off and we have rapport, which is of course the first thing, which we already had like instantly. And then I'd find out, what was going on in your life and like, oh, you're a podcaster and you have these goals. And like, there's always something that limits people. So to figure out what your limitations were. In other words, what do you hit up against that stops you from reaching your goals or being the best version of yourself, whether it's you procrastinate or that you get scared with cold calling or you have your own, personal glass, whatever it is. I would find that. And then I would say, what would it be worth for you to overcome that limitation and have all these dreams, which I would like repeat back to the person. And it would be like, well, that'd be priceless. I'm like, great, because it's only $2,000. Right.
Exactly. So you were gonna pay priceless. You only have to pay $2,000.
It's only $2,000. So can't afford not to do it. And I felt really good about that because I thought that I was helping them. And I think that once you see, and that was always my technique. And even since leaving, people who've been like, Sarah, you never hard sold me. And I appreciate that because I really did care about people. I wanted them to take the training and to like make it work for them. Other people I know totally hard sold other people when they say things like, well, this is why you're not successful. You can't make this decision. Do you see how you do this in your whole life? And people would be like, fuck off. Excuse me. Can I swear on this?
Oh, yeah, hell okay, yeah. Sorry. Go ahead. Yeah, please.
Such a potty mouth.
Yeah, of course.
So yeah, I think that the hard selling in the industry is pretty gross.
It's extremely offensive to me when it's also someone when it comes to health goals. And I can tell you, I mean, very firsthand being in business coaching scenarios where it is, this is literally what a lot of practitioners are being taught is hit the pain points, increase urgency of sales. So on my discovery calls, if someone says like, hey, I want to have this goal, can I lose this amount of weight by this time? I'm like, I don't know. I can't, I'm not God. I have no idea what's going to happen with your body. All we can do is create that safe space for people and let the healing happen from their own autonomous decisions. Right. And I think that's really the difference between a practitioner. If someone is telling you with 100% certainty they can fix a problem, it really is a huge red flag. You're absolutely right. I also fear when there's only one tool or strategy in a practitioner's toolbox or a diet's toolbox, right? Like maybe, again, the celery juice you could have taken from, that famous, I don't even like, that's a name I don't love to say, that famous person's program, and you take Bulletproof Coffee from Dave Asprey. The fact that you pick the different things from the different programs that you like is really powerful as opposed to, I'm going like hardcore bulletproof. I'm never eating like chickpeas again, like I'm not like I think the picking and choosing and feeling what works for you is also what you've adapted that seems to be working really well too.
And that's the same way I do my spirituality now. Like I will never join an organization ever again. I'll never follow anyone ever again. I have my own version of meditation. I do very non-culty yoga, which doesn't have a particular, like it's not Ashtanga or Kundalini or Bikrams. It's just a power flow. And if, I like that they don't have it's like just spiritual enough with not being dogmatic. I light my Palo Santo. I have those other health rituals I just told you about, but it's not a particular thing. Actually, it's funny you mentioned David Asprey because that's one of the things that the person said because I'm into Bulletproof and David Asprey apparently is, I don't like, and I probably follow him or follow Bulletproof on Instagram, but apparently he's got a very particular political stance, which means that I must also have that political stance if I do bone broth. I mean, keep saying that.
You're like, I have Bulletproof. By the way, he loves bone broth too.
I
it's
also
fine.
love bone broth, so that's probably why they assumed. Yeah.
You're like, I'm literally putting butter inside of my coffee. Yeah. I'm not following a political movement. I'm just putting literal butter inside of this coffee that I'm drinking. That's the only thing that's happening.
Yes.
And also, it's also very overassumed and divisive in general because I wouldn't care very much about what someone's political affiliations are. I want to see the science of what they're presenting much more. Yeah. I think this other idea of what I saw in the vow and what I saw from your experience that stood out to me so much is this idea of just suppressing your own survival instincts and suppressing your own ideas in favor of what the collective or in favor of what the leader is saying. Can we speak into that a little bit?
Well, I think the most dangerous thing that Keith did is he dismantled our inner compass. And that compass is supposed to guide you, that gut instinct you said earlier. And I had my gut instinct from day one saying, get the fuck out. But I also trusted the person who brought me to stick past day 3, not knowing that you can have your belief system turned upside down or rewired or be indoctrinated into a new one in 3 days if you're open, which I was, because I wanted to get my money's worth. I did believe it was possible to change. And even though I thought a lot of things are really weird and did want to leave, I had made a commitment to stick through it. And that I didn't realize was the beginning of overriding my gut instinct. I had an interview recently with Dan Levin, who was one of the survivors of the Sarah Lawrence College Larry Ray survivor, Stolen Youth. It's an incredible story. And he said something which I'm going to adopt, which was, it wasn't just that it was dismantled, but like the person then becomes your compass. So the person you're following is your new compass. And that is something that even though obviously I was in for so long and I was like, I was very deeply devoted, there were certain things that I just didn't do. And so in relation to the diet stuff, people would always say things like, well, Keith says, da, 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 da. And I remember, I think this is even in my book. I was like, what, is he a nutritionist now? Because so many people were counting calories. And I personally, I know it works for some people, I personally have never counted calories. And I saw these people that were like counting calories and eating canned soup and white bread and having their calories low. And I'm eating like quinoa and,
bulletproof coffee.
That came later. That came later. That was a fad in NXIVM briefly, and I thought it was ridiculous. But I was eating like avocado. People were like, wow, that's so many calories. And I'm like, it doesn't work that way. Like, I'm not a nutritionist, but I know that I'm eating better than you are, even if you're eating less calories. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up calories, because it's part of this aspect of our mental health is when, again, we suppress our own instinct and then we start getting our understanding of the world from other people. There's an easy way to do that, which is starving yourself. So it's actually really easy to gain access and control over someone else's brain through starvation.
Absolutely.
Because our ability to make decisions is so limited. So it's so, some of these diets also have this added power of literally starving our brains of glucose so we cannot access decision-making ability or think. And so that was something that I was like, it's so wild that this idea that diet culture or low calorie diets or all these things can actually cause you to not only deteriorate internally, but it can actually cause these issues with your ability to hold your own power too.
In fact, I didn't see it as that at the time. I just like internally it was like, I'm not going to do that. And this is what I've realized about myself in my recovery and trying to understand the journey I went on, is that I am a good girl. I like to follow rules. Like I'll go through TSA and not make a scene, but inside I'm like, this is fucking bullshit, and I'll smuggle in a little.
I find you to be such a rebel. Well, I'm surprised. I find you so rebellious.
You've seen me on the other side of it. But when I was in NXIVM, I was doing the thing. Like I would be like, yes, I'm going to enter my coach points and do all this like boring data work, but that I never did. So sort of like it's an external obedience, but internally I was very rebellious. And that was my true self. My true self inside was like, Keith is not a nutritionist. Why are all these women eating the way that he says? And I knew that they were doing extreme diets. It was always a different thing. It was like at one point they were all raw, which I also tried. Most of the people were vegetarian, which I tried for like a couple of years and it didn't work for me. But that was like looked down upon, that I was, quote, choosing violence. And I'm sure there's listeners of people who are vegetarian and think, well, she is choosing violence, because that is part of the belief around why some people are vegetarian.
But that's not the context in which it was used.
No, exactly.
Obviously.
And, in my ideal world, I would like to be vegetarian, but also eat steak. So I don't know how to do it because I can't make it all work.
Sarah, you're on the podcast. I was a vegan for over 10 years and it was one of the factors that deteriorated my health the most. So I'm definitely a pro-inclusive of all real foods in people's diets kind of person. So you don't need to have that voice telling you should be vegetarian. You're good. It's from a registered dietitian.
I appreciate that. Exactly. And so yeah, that was a stage I went to. That's when I was going to Pure Food and Wine, because I was a raw vegan at the time, and that was like the best place to eat in the world.
The food was so
good,
ridiculously good. It was so good. But I mean, what? And just the odds of that being one of your it was everyone in New York. It was the hottest place in New York. It wasn't you specifically landing in these situations twice.
I just think think it's hilarious that I was there and met Sarma and then had her on our podcast years later as like breaking news from her harrowing journey and her cult of one 100%. Story. But just to backtrack for a second, because you were but this is you were saying about overriding your own voice for the leader. Was that the question?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's just what concerns do we have about people blindly following health advice or blindly following practitioners' advice or diets or MLM's advice? And how do we get to a point, and what strategies do people use to make us suppress our own voices? Like how do we know that it's not our real voice that's talking to us?
That's a really good question. I don't know if you've read Glennon Doyle's Untamed. Yeah, I love that book. And she talked about, and again, don't follow anyone blindly, including her. And she's probably one of the first to say it. But there was something that she says, I'm going to totally butcher it, but she explains I think she calls it the knowing, which requires some stillness and some quiet and to connect with yourself. For me, it's like a conversation with, like a wiser version of myself. If I can be very still and quiet, I usually do it as I'm meditating, like in Shavasana, or I'm about to go to sleep, or in the morning. And it's like literally like a two-way conversation in my head. I'm like, oh, hi. Oh, there you are. Oh, no, I'm always here. Okay. So, and it's just sort of like this back and forth. To connect to that part of myself is something that takes work. And not many people, I think, are even still enough to know what that thing is. And also, like, we're lazy. We want the quick fix. We want someone to say, this is what we have to do. And a lot of the things that we've looked at, especially with the podcast, almost all of the cults start with what looks like autonomy and what looks like, choice. And, in NXIVM, it was called being at cause, and like you're responsible for your life, and it feels very good and very, very potent. But then it slowly erodes at that sense of self. And if you commit to whatever this thing is offering, and you really commit, and a lot of these things require a commitment, at some point that means actually handing over your voice and your decisions and that knowing to somebody else. And that happens slowly. It's not like, hey, join this thing for me and, get the leader's initials torched into your flesh, right? It happens many, many years over time. The frog in boiling water metaphor works nicely here. I'm sure your audience knows it. Did I answer your question?
You so freaking answered my question. And I think, the whole point of this podcast, Quiet the Diet, is all about accessing your own voice and trying to push out and down other people's ideas of what's healthy for you. There's obviously merit to working with a healthcare professional. Duh, I am one. Of course, I believe that. But I think that it's so important, even in a really healthy relationship with a practitioner or engaging in a diet, that you're still listening to that voice. And I use a tool with my clients, which is like, when you hear a voice coming up and says like, you should be doing that, just try to name it, associate it with where you might have learned it, if it's your real voice. And if it's your real voice, you'll see like a beautiful blue or green or gold color coming up, and associate those different voices that we have with colors or sensations. And there is quite literally a gut response. And for people to understand that we are so freaking smart beyond our conscious brains, like we really have those instincts. And those instincts really, I think, ultimately saved you, Sarah, because you at some point said, hey, do you remember hearing like the real rebel Sarah voice coming up and being like, oh, there I am? Like, did you have a moment like that?
I mean, it's definitely starting to creep up in the last few years before I left. It wasn't just at the end. There was a lot of things that were happening that weren't okay, that I couldn't wrap my head around, because ultimately I assumed that even the things I didn't like, that the leader still had good intentions. I couldn't see that Keith was bad, as a bad person. It was like, this is an error, or this is like a mistake. And I was so upset about it. And the full voice didn't come out until I could see the whole picture, like what I was actually involved with. But yeah, I've learned from cult expert Stephen Hassan, who's incredible and a big part of my healing. He talks about how there's like a pre-cult identity. And then when you're in the cult and you fully embrace it, you have your cult identity, but your pre-cult identity is still in there. So once the bubble burst, like I just came busting out. I woke up or like deprogrammed or unindoctrinated myself very, very, very quickly. And I was back. And then, yes, the rebel side came out because I was like, fuck this. Not only do I have to expose it, but like, gotta take this thing down because it's not only bad, it's the opposite of what we were teaching.
Exactly. And I think that incongruence for people can feel really hard. And it's so hard because not only is there this diet culture voice, now there's this anti-diet culture voice. Not only is there a vegan voice inside of all of us, there's a you should eat the meat for protein voice. And we have so many different messages going on. And like you said, we want stillness. We get so much decision fatigue that we eventually say, please, someone just tell me what to eat. I don't even know what to do anymore. Just someone tell me what to do. And I think that the more good someone is as a person, the more they're going to have these quandaries because you're trying to do always the most moral thing and the thing that feels good instinctually too.
Decision fatigue is a real thing. I have that right now after moving and trying to figure out what to bring and what to pack and what to sell and what to give away. I think had that happened or like had I been in that state and, without NXIVM and somebody saying, hey, do this method or join this group, I would have been like, okay, anything to make this feeling go away.
You're like, okay, do you have an organizer I can use to do all this stuff with? Because I cannot think about, exactly. It's our instinctual survival voices. The more we suppress them, the more they can make us sick inside too. And I think that our body, any kind of illness we have, our body tries to communicate with us through signs and symptoms. So the more that not only there's voices yelling at us, but we're experiencing symptoms, which is funny because we think we want to suppress the symptoms. You actually want to let them up. You want to let the voices up. You want to let the symptoms up and let your body show you what's really going on. But that's another kind of conversation. There's one thing I wanted to touch on too, which hilariously is from your friend Mark Vicente's podcast, WTF is on my mind. And he talks about this idea of how you can how discipline is a good thing in kind of like doses. And once you kind of chase discipline too much when it comes to health even, and he was talking about how he would like run into the ocean when it was very cold. And then he was like, wait, am I doing this to help myself or am I kind of like punishing myself? Can we talk about this idea in the health space or in your own experience of like, when do we know something is like you're punishing yourself or you're actually just doing it because it's good for you and because you want to do it?
Let me think about that for a second. It's a hard question. Yes. I'm not a big self-punisher with stuff like that personally, but definitely discipline is something that I struggled with in my journey because discipline was definitely like a big part of the NXIVM journey. Discipline was how you showed character and consistency. And there's this thing called persistency, which became a noun. That's one of the things they messed with our language. Persistency was a thing that you did every day as a commitment. So people did persistencies on like learning Spanish or doing crunches. A lot of people did calorie ones. And as you know, the calorie dieting thing was a big part of what turned into like the grossest parts of NXIVM. I think discipline was something that my pre-cult self kind of rejected. And I sort of pretended to go along with it. I have just things I'm consistent with. Like I'm consistent with my yoga. I'm consistent. I've always been a healthy eater. Like I said, there's been points where I've been obsessive, but generally it's not a diet. I just eat healthy. Like I'm gluten-free. I'm largely dairy-free. Mine is goat cheese. I have
very special goat cheese.
Special organic. And my family's always teasing me that it's like has to be gluten-free, dairy-free, sugar-free, artisanal from the farmer's market. Like that's me. But so I'm consistent, but discipline for the sake of discipline felt too regimented for me. It's probably why I didn't like Bikram's yoga, which now we know, another
wow.
Right? Interestingly, I didn't like it even when I was in NXIVM. I did it if I was like in some foreign country and it's the only thing they offered, but I never, became a devotee. It's funny. I could see that was culty, but I couldn't see it in my own group.
Well, it's obviously because it was very, very slow. You have to see enough. If you're a smart person like you are, you have to see enough good and gain enough good from something to continue believing in it. I did do Bikram yoga, but not in a like very regimented way. But I always was fascinated because if you did hot yoga, but it wasn't Bikram, they were like, no, you're not doing the 26 postures or whatever it is. That doesn't count. Like it's not the thing. Like we said, nothing can be the thing. And I think that's what's so hard for people too. Yeah. That I think that you're being a person who's generally healthy and you're being a person who pushes harsh discipline and punishment was like a saving grace and will always be a saving grace for you too. That was definitely your inner self. It sounds like protecting you too. I think so,
because I also started doing things like penance, right? And, that just, I was like, especially being Jewish and not being raised Catholic or Christian, that wasn't part of my upbringing. I was like, what are we doing here? Like, this is personal development. This isn't religion. But sure, I'll stand at 2 a.m. to counter this bad thing I did. Like, I just kind of went along with it. I went along with a lot of things because I liked the good of it. And I knew somewhere internally that if I stood up against it, I wouldn't be able to keep doing what I was doing. So I was like, sure. But because I was in Vancouver and there was nobody higher rank overseeing me in person, like on the ground, I just kind of did my own thing.
Well, that was again another saving grace for you too. Distance sounds very, very nice too.
Saved me.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that it's so hard for people to change behaviors when A, it's working for them, B, it's working for other people, and they feel good doing it. So it makes total sense. And then at some point, we hope, especially with food or anything like that, because I can guarantee that there's not one strict food program that's a lifelong awesome thing to do. There's not one, is that hopefully people's inner voice kicks in for them and they can start making decisions based on what actually works with their bodies too.
For sure. And I know that like that's bulletproof isn't what I want to do forever. For me, it helped me lose baby weight after a second babe, which was harder. And it also gives me like, it's talking about decision fatigue. I don't have to think about my breakfast because I do eat breakfast. I just eat it a little bit later. But when I wake up and have my coffee with all the stuff in it, like I don't have to think about it. It's just one less. I think that's why people do the thing where they get all black socks, so they don't have to match their socks. It's just, it makes life easier. It's not like
it takes the decision fatigue out. You don't have to think about it anymore. It just is. Actually, my husband and I just threw out donated if they were nice and fresh, all of our socks, and then just got only new ones. And it was a pretty life-changing experience because I was like, I don't have to match these up all. I already have all of the same sock. I think this is an amazing idea.
It's brilliant.
That fundamentally changed my brilliant is very generous, Sarah.
That could be the next book. I don't know what it's called exactly. My book that I want to write next is going to be called, because we just moved and we got here and we had to like go from furnished rental to furnished rental for about 4 months. So my next book's going to be called My Life in Tote Bags.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Let me tell you something. If you need any additional tote bags to add, I have just so many it's a New York thing, right?
Yes.
So many tote bags.
I have in fact, I'm looking at a pile
so many tote bags
over there. It's like, I can't get rid of them. I haven't brought some from Canada.
Sarah Shapiro Edmondson.
Lover of totes.
A life of tote bags. That's a lover of totes. A lever of NXIVM and a lover of totes. That's the book's name. We've really got it.
Culty tote bags. That's my favorite one. That's the one I bring to yoga because it's a conversation starter.
Oh, I need one of these. I'm like literally going to retrieve one somehow. This is important. Let me purchase one.
You can purchase one.
Yeah, I want to purchase one immediately.
You can purchase one. I don't have one in this room, but I will send you one of these if you'll wear it.
Yeah, of course I'm going to freaking wear it. Are you kidding? It's like a Harry Potter lightning rod too. Yes, of course I'm going to wear that.
I'm going to send that to you.
By the way, Harry Potter's an excellent example of a controversial figure, and I will always love Harry Potter regardless of the controversy surrounding Harry Potter. I love it.
I kind of like don't look at the news unless it's like really, and so I just skim the surface of it. I don't even know I don't know. I don't get it. Like, I don't understand what's happening around that. So I have to like educate myself, but it doesn't make any sense to me.
It's a turf situation. It's a whole thing. It's even very complicated.
Word is new to me.
Yeah. It's new to many people, but in the point being, what are you drinking, by the way? What do we got there?
This is like, This is like the quick version of bulletproof. If I just need 200 milligrams of caffeine. It's a super coffee.
It looks amazing. And by the way,
it's really good.
I really love bulletproof coffee. I'm not a person who generally drinks coffee consistently, but I do. It's more stabilizing for me than other coffees. And yeah, I love that bulletproof coffee works for you too, because all that matters is that it works for you. That's the only thing that literally matters in nutrition.
Thank you. And if I have regular coffee, I get too jittery, but because of the oil in it, it's the slow release.
It's more grounding too. The oil. Grounding. Yeah, exactly. Yes. It doesn't hit the blood sugar as much. He obviously removes mycotoxins and everything too. Shout out Dave, I guess, right? I mean, we're here. So, there you go.
By the way, Dave, if you want to be my sponsor, I don't care what your political views are.
Exactly. So, Dave Asprey, this is a message from Michelle and Sarah Shapiro Edmondson. If you want to be a little bit culty sponsor, it doesn't matter. Go right ahead and do whatever you want. Exactly. Yeah. Sure. I don't even know. I
don't even know what his political thing is. I just know that one of my listeners was offended that I would support him. It's happening, whether you're vaxxed or not vaxxed, red or blue, right or left, black or white, Republican, Democrat. That extreme division is just like nothing bothers me more.
It's more, I think it's more than bothering. It's extremely dangerous when it comes to health information. And just as a note about the scientific method, the point of the scientific method is to disprove yourself. So if anyone says anything this is rock solid nutrition science, this is 100%, we're disproving stuff all the time. That's what we do. Yeah. That's part of the game. So we have to be able to have discourse about things, especially when it comes to health. I'm a functional dietitian, which instantly makes me like a rebel, like where I'm an integrative functional, much more on the holistic side of things. Yeah. So hilariously in America, whereby in every other country in the world, that doesn't make you a rebel. It's just the way that they practice nutrition. In America, that makes you totally controversial to be a functional dietitian, which is, again, goes to show you that just because it's a current idea about something, it doesn't mean it's inherently or morally wrong or good or anything like that. You just have to look at everything through the lens of data and objectivity. And more importantly, what feels good, because someone said that this guy might be Republican. No, it makes you feel amazing. That's the only thing that freaking matters, is that you take a little piece from everything. So Sarah, do you have any final tips for people they're approaching? They want to start a diet. They want to start working with a practitioner. What would you say, a top tip? Or it can be something you already said that you want to reiterate.
In addition to everything I already said, I think that one thing that people also have to be aware of is that, it's okay to be wrong and it's okay to make mistakes. And I think sometimes people start something like this and then they want to make it work and they want to prove to themselves and their family that it was a good investment. And then they stick it. It's like somebody who stays in a relationship that's not healthy because there's too many downsides to splitting up. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So same thing with this stuff. Give it a try. If it doesn't work, you don't have to, get your money's worth, which is what I did. And I wish that I hadn't stuck it through that long. And I think generally, whether it's a diet or a program or personal development or whatever, I think having the mindset of evolving and being the best you and all that stuff is totally fine. But you can also have that with a level of self-love and acceptance, and that you're not, broken or you're not damaged and there's nothing wrong with you. So it's sort of both things can exist. You can love yourself and accept and not be negative towards yourself, and also developing or growing or bettering yourself, which is, I don't necessarily have the tools for that. I think it's something that I'm still aspiring to do and to have, but it's a perceptual shift. You don't have to feel like shit and, down on yourself in order to better yourself.
It's that idea also of this dichotomy that we were talking about, the discomfort thing of I call it compassion versus coddling. It's totally okay to be compassionate with yourself and be honest with yourself. It's not okay to be extremely harsh on yourself, self-critical and punishing. And it's also usually not too helpful to be too coddling and be everything you do is great. And this is totally fine. There's a sweet middle, which is just knowing yourself and listening to yourself and being totally compassionate and honest with yourself. And that's, I think, pretty much would help people in any sort of cultish situation.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Well said. Write a book.
Yeah, go ahead. Write it then, Michelle. Okay. We have like 18 book titles that we're coming out of this conversation with.
I feel like we should collaborate more in the future.
I know we're going to. Sarah, this is like my life dream. You don't get it. I just really have to reiterate this. My entire family, we're not people who are like generally celebrity, like maybe Larry David we're like super into, but we're not like those people. Like when I told my cousins, and they're going to die listening to this, that I was interviewing Sarah Edmondson, they were like, oh, you're literally meeting like the most important person on planet Earth. I'm like, yeah, dude, like this is my thing. Okay.
What are your
like
cousins'
this is
names?
This is the big moment. David and Eric and Amy.
David,
Eric, and Amy.
I really appreciate it. I'm going to start my own little group, David, Eric, and Amy. Do you want to join? And you could be my second in command. It's just a small group. It's not a cult, just like a little organization.
Also,
you have the most important person.
you have 48 hours to reply. How much is it worth to you? That's it. How much is it worth to you?
Can't afford not to join, really.
Exactly. I know. Only $2,000 to hang out with you, Sarah Edmondson. We'll take it. We'll all take it. Sarah, where can people find you besides your incredible podcast, A Little Bit Culty, which is a must listen and most people are already listening to? Where else can people find you and learn from you?
If you want to hear the whole story of my journey.
Yes, please. Move it into the frame more.
The true story of how I escaped NXIVM, the cult that bound my life. And by the way, I have had this removed. I had plastic surgery. So my brand is gone now, thank goodness. The best way to reach me is either through Sarah Edmondson on Instagram. And we're also at A Little Bit Culty on Instagram. I'm elsewhere, but I don't really use Twitter that much. I find it kind of gross. The whole, Nippy calls it the bathroom wall of social media.
It really is. It's just putting ideas out. Exactly. Yeah. I don't use Twitter either. I think I have one from like 5 years ago and don't have the login. So if I do have one, don't quote me on that. But Sarah, thank you so freaking much for spending the time today. I am certain we'll be collaborating in the future. And I hope am imploring people, please go read Sarah's book, Scarred. Please go listen to the podcast. It will be the best thing you do. I also have to say, WTF is on my mind. Mark Vicente, I'm obsessed.
Also good. Also so very good. And if you come to Atlanta, please let me know and I will look you up. Are you in Manhattan proper?
No. So this is a big thing, Sarah, because my whole adult life, I was in Manhattan proper. I'm from Queens originally, but then moved to Manhattan the second I graduated college. I had a huge mold exposure in my apartment in the city. So for the year, I needed to move to Fort Lee, New Jersey. But I have huge identity issues about this because I'm like, I am a New Yorker and I will be back once the mold situation is handled. But I needed an apartment that was like new because of that. But I'm always in Manhattan proper, but this year I'm in Fort Lee. It's a big thing for me. So thank you for your sensitivity around this. But if you're in Manhattan, I'll be seeing you.
I will visit you there. We'll go for a really healthy or not healthy meal. I don't care. You choose the restaurant.
We start with Bulletproof Coffee. Dave, she needs sponsors, Dave. Let's go. Okay. He didn't listen to this. I'm going to send it to him though. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I will. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. That was a really fun conversation.